Good morning or good afternoon wherever you are, and welcome to the Shephard Defence Podcast. This time we are coming to you from sunny Abu Dhabi, having just spent the week at IDEX and NavDex, and joining me today is my venerable colleague Norbert Neumann. Norbert, I would say welcome to the show, but you've been on it before.
Hey Harry, good morning.
It's good to be here, and today I think we're going to kind of run down all of the stuff we've seen this week, which has been, I mean, it's safe to say quite a lot of stuff. There's concepts up to our eyeballs, stands, and thousands of steps have been walked. So we're all feeling a little bit crispy, which might come through in some of the quality of the analysis. But hopefully we're able to give kind of people who weren't able to make it all the way to IDEX and NavDex a bit of a roundup of the show. So I suppose the first thing, I mean, I don't know if you want to go first, Noel, but the first thing that kind of stood out for you this week.
Yeah, I'm then back to the point that it was a long week. I don't think I can do another 16,000 step day. It's just I think 4 of them were quite enough. And yeah, what stood out, the show was very interesting. You know, being my first IDEX, obviously was plenty to see. It was quite interesting to see a Russian pavilion, you know, both inside and outside. Equally, the Chinese presence was huge, which, you know, you can't really see anywhere, not even in European trade shows, obviously. And you know, at the same time, it wasn't really a trade show of you know, very serious contracts or new platforms. It was more like, you know, the sense. What I sort of got from many companies, it was more like to do business with each other. You know, plenty of MOUs were signed, and I think we can expand on that later on. But I think this sort of summarizes my general feeling of the show.
Yeah, I think that's a good thing to raise, was the Russian pavilion kind of tucked outside. I mean, it's not really a surprise that they're here, given the kind of the neutrality of the country, and I suppose no matter what's happening in Ukraine, they're still doing deals with other countries, not necessarily here, but other countries in other parts of the world. But it was certainly I suppose a bit of a shock to the system to see. It's not like something we get at European trade shows. So I think there was also one thing that really stood out, which was kind of the sheer kind of, I suppose, kind of obvious goodwill between the Israeli companies and the Gulf companies, that now kind of ever since the Abraham Accords, it seems to be a totally new dynamic. I mean, you've got all of these companies coming together and partnering on systems. There was a deal for a new USV. It was a joint project between the Israelis and the Gulf countries, and it's really interesting to see how quickly that dynamic has shifted. I mean, I suppose Israeli equipment has always been here, but maybe not to the extent that it's in the forefront these days. And I think it's something that's it's something that's going to be a really interesting dynamic to watch moving forward, how that security relationship unfolds, because, you know, naturally there's the kind of I suppose the boogeyman in the region is Iran, and if these countries can kind of join forces in terms of defence equipment and how they're looking to defend themselves, it's going to be a really interesting one to watch play out. I don't know if you kind of had a look and saw that as well.
I mean, the dynamics are definitely very interesting. You know, as you say, probably, you know, a few number of years ago, you couldn't have seen that sort of Israeli presence, you know, at all, let alone, you know, a massive area, one hall just dedicated for Israeli kit, Israeli companies. And as you say, very clearly doing business with the Emiratis, with Saudi Arabia, and they seem to be doing quite well. On the dynamics, I would say that, you know, I talked to a few people, and what they sort of said is that, you know, lots of companies are here, lots of companies brought their stuff and booked pavilions, booths and stands, because obviously they had to sign up 2 years ago at the last IDEX, which was fairly quiet because it was still, you know, COVID times. But what they think is that this show was more like a business-making thing, also because the urgency, the dynamics lay in Europe these days. So as you may remember, when we were at Eurosatory, last summer, it was very hectic. You could see that everybody was, on the edge. Everybody was talking about Ukraine all the time. And here in this region, there is currently not, there's just no sense of urgency that they really need to do something. They do business, right? They do modernize. They do expand. They do develop their own stuff, and they buy things from foreign countries as well. But just simply not that pace that you see in Europe.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting point, and we had a few conversations on the show floor, didn't we, about how the dynamic is evolving, and how the centre of gravity of defence has shifted over time. I know, especially like you say, last year at Eurosatory, there was for obvious reasons a natural sense of kind of get up and go from the European countries to kind of get systems going. Like you say, I mean, when you say deal making, it totally is. I mean, the amount of MOUs signed between Western companies and the Emiratis was staggering. You had GM Defence signing an MOU with Tawazun to explore their kind of how they can cooperate. You had BAE Systems signing the deal with Edge Group, and that's a really interesting dynamic as well, because it's no longer a case that Western companies say, "Hi UAE, here's 10,000 tanks. Thanks for the money. See you later when you need an MOU." Sorry, need an MLU, not an MOU. They've signed loads of MOUs. When you need an upgrade, you know where we are, and you know where to get your ammunition from. The dynamic has totally changed. It's now, if you want to do business here, you have to partner and you have to bring value, and that dynamic is very different to how it's been in the past. But also, I mean, it's not unsurprising. Lots of these countries in the Gulf are trying to diversify their economies, and if you can get a thriving defence industry, like many countries in the West do, debatable if the UK does, they've got lots of very, very good capabilities, but sometimes not the investment, that really does give them another pillar to their economy, so that they can kind of build industrial bases. And then, the goal for a lot of these countries for these companies is to become major players in themselves. Edge, I remember when it kind of first was founded as the conglomerate, people were saying they wanted it to be the kind of the Lockheed Martin of the Middle East, and it seems to be that with these MOUs and these partnerships, they're really taking steps to get themselves on that journey. I mean, one kind of major bit of news from the show was the fact that Edge has signed an export deal. Abu Dhabi Shipbuilding, which is part of Edge, has signed an export deal to sell free ships and a number of boats to the Angolan Navy, which is traditionally, this is the biggest export contract in Edge and Abu Dhabi Shipbuilding's history, and that's really a sign that, even though these companies, I suppose, kind of in their infancy in terms of their current form, that they're really starting to kind of steal a march on some of the competition that have been there for quite a long time.
Yeah, is there anyone that didn't sign an MOU with Edge on this show? Joke besides, they did do loads of business, but as you say, it's not enough just to bring your kit here. The UAE really wants to take part in defense procurement, in developing their own systems as well, and working, and attracting foreign investors. And this is, a part of Abu Dhabi's economic vision 2030. They just call it sometimes Vision 2030. It's about basically building an open, efficient, and effective global integrated business environment, and that includes defense as well. I think they want to bump up their defense spending over the next 5 years as well, and attracting foreign investment, diversifying their portfolio, and slightly trying to move away from just relying very heavily on oil production.
Yeah, and it's nothing that's never been done before. The West, technology transfer, building stuff in house is something that all Western countries seek to do, and as these countries develop their economies, it makes perfect sense that they'd want to do that. I mean, you've got an environment where there's so much money that can be invested into the development of defence capabilities, and you see that from some of the R&D that's going on. Sometimes hard to distinguish between what's just a concept that's been mocked up and what's a real system. But I think I've seen more concepts coming out of the Emirati concept company this week than I've seen coming out of some Western defence companies in the entire time that I've been working in this industry. They've got, when you can afford to, you can really, really develop capabilities. And when you're coming at it from kind of, what I suppose is a kind of almost starting afresh, with these developments of capabilities. It's really interesting, some of the stuff that's going on, and there's, I suppose, quite nimble as well. The amount of concepts of loitering munitions and UAVs and kind of systems that the West is also producing. But I mean, just the sheer scale of the amount of concepts was pretty mind-boggling.
Also, in terms of future technologies or technologies that are still largely in the making, or we have very impressive elements of those, like AI, digital twin, and sort of integrating multiple sort of technologies. The UAE provides a really good ground for those things. Like if you look at Dubai, it's a very advanced city, right? It's like a 55 years old city as we know it now. But it's extremely advanced and smart. The metro system is sort of connected, integrated into the highway system, and I think plans are to sort of get the police involved in that as well. So you would have a massive network of sort of technologies and parts of the city that are all connected, linked together. They can review everything that's happening on those, and this will have major defense implications. Let that be multi-domain integration, multi-domain training environments, synthetics. AI is just in a way the UAE has done more in the past 10-20 years that other countries did in the past 60 years.
Yeah, you're totally right about that. And the interesting thing is that in the region too, it's not just kind of the US or the UK and France kind of like looking to sell here. There's the range of countries that are getting deals and signing MOUs and winning contracts is incredible. I know you wrote about the well, I think, do they refer it to the South Korean Patriot, or is that something that's going to upset KAI? I don't know.
Yeah, LIG, next one, they dubbed their the air defense system, their SAM system, the Korean Patriot, and the UAE has bought it. They signed the contract in 2020, and the company also started delivering it. And they will do the last batch in 2025. Although they wouldn't say how many of the systems were actually sold, but what we know, it's a fairly large contract, 3.5 billion. And the government is very confident that they will be also selling to Saudi Arabia next year or the year after the latest. So yeah, that was also very interesting. That you can see as that Russia is sort of embryoned in sanctions. Companies try to find a gap in that market because obviously nobody really wants to buy from Russia anymore. Some companies or some countries may choose not to do from Israel for political reasons, and US or European kit might be a bit too expensive for them. And that's where you see Turkey coming in with their stuff. You see South Korea and Singapore and other countries that we don't talk about that much these days.
Yeah, and it's evident in so many pieces of equipment, like the Saudi multi-mission surface combatants. I mean, I didn't speak to anyone about it this week. I would have liked to, but just didn't get the time. But I think it's kind of emblematic of this approach of we will take kind of the best from everywhere and then integrate it all together. So, those Saudi ships that are being built, there's 4 of them. They're being built in the US by Fincantieri Marinette Marine. They're based on the Freedom class LCS, but they've got Hensoldt radar from Germany. They've got MBDA CAM missiles, which I suppose are being built in Italy. I think Leonardo guns. Like as you see all of this equipment, it's not just single source in certain countries. It's really kind of this panoramic view that there's kind of you can almost get the idea that they're looking out and saying what's the best and also affordable in every area and kind of picking it and then merging it together. And I suppose that'll be an interesting dynamic as these MOUs come to pass as well, as to how these systems maybe taken from other countries, then get blended together and become, I suppose, over time, kind of indigenous, kind of Emirati capabilities.
It's interesting you mentioned integration. As you say, they buy kit from everywhere, but also they try to sort of cooperate with international organizations to sort of develop their own stuff. And integration and interoperability is very much a thing here. I don't know how many conversations you had around that, but when we talk about NATO or their very close allies, interoperability is at the forefront of every discussion. And they try to bring that here too. I saw many companies try to sell their capabilities, or already are selling their capabilities to help the UAE cooperate and do exercises and be able to fight together with the US in particular, but most NATO allies as well.
Yeah, no, you're totally right about that. And what's also interesting is the new capability areas. We briefly mentioned loitering munitions earlier, but obviously, I mean, systems are pretty much everyone knows what they are, and everyone, I suppose, wants them. Seeing how valuable they've been in the east of Ukraine, and I don't know if you saw it on the Edge stand. There was that huge loitering munition launcher, and I suppose this is the point as well, right? It's that Western countries, these MOUs don't necessarily just mean Western stuff coming into the UAE. It also means other stuff can go backwards. And so I was speaking to GM Defence about their kind of vision for how they're going to work with Tawazun and build that relationship with the UAE. And that's very much about there's UAE interest in GM Defence vehicles, their electric drive capabilities, maybe even kind of some of the hydrogen fuel cell work they're doing. But also, there's plenty of systems that are made by Edge, whether it's turrets, loitering munitions, UAVs, that could all be integrated onto what is kind of a Western platform, and there's kind of no reason that can't go back the other direction. And so, given 10 years' time, I don't think it would be a surprise if some of these Edge-designed Emirati systems are starting to appear on Western vehicles. It already happens with IAI and Rafael and lots of Israeli companies. There's their kit is kind of prevalent on all Western systems. Whether it's trophy APSs being put on Abrams, Challenger-free Leopard tanks. So you're going to get Emirati equipment making its way back the other side, and I suppose it's a good thing for the defence industry that there's more ideas. People bring different perspectives in terms of what's effective. Engineers have different viewpoints, so it would be interesting to see that dynamic of things going the other way. And I suppose that's already been kicked off with the fact that just before the show, Edge acquired a massive stake in Milrem from Estonia. So you saw that on the Edge stand, and so that's another thing that's potentially going to be interesting to watch as that plays out, is the fact that this is a defence company, a country and a region with lots of money, a willingness to diversify and develop new equipment. So maybe there will be more Western providers of really interesting bits of kit being snapped up.
Yeah, the transfer of technology is an interesting one. I'd imagine that European defense companies have way more experience and knowledge, just simply because of the time spent in developing and working on these things. But in another way that the UAE or Edge, for example, could boost European defense capabilities, that it brings capital to the table. Just as you said, they bought a massive share in Milrem, and what they basically do, when I talk to the companies, basically what they said, that's their natural way of expanding the company, not just to grow organically, expanding their business units and basically developing new systems, but also in seeking out the greatest technology that's out there. As you said, they have the resources, they bring the capital there, and I very much got the sense that they want to do a hands-off approach. They really want to leave in the instance of Milrem anyway. They want to leave the pre-acquisition team very intact. They developed the system, they did the technology, so they want them to carry on doing what they did. Right? They don't want to change anything, because clearly Milram is a very successful business with a very successful technology, but then being money there would allow them to also diversify, right? To actually look into areas where they couldn't before. So I think that's probably another way how the UAE could, enhance defense capabilities and defense development elsewhere.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, we've gone on quite a bit about the kind of the development of capabilities in the region. And it is certainly a really interesting one to watch. But I think, given we've got probably about 5 minutes left, I think we should maybe spend a little bit of time talking about China and the sheer amount of Chinese systems that were on show. I mean, us as defence journalists and also, I suppose, equipment nerds to a bit of an extent, it's very rare that we get the opportunity to see some of these models and mock-ups and systems on display. Also, I mean, sometimes I don't have a clue what I'm looking at because we get so little news that it's hard to know what's new and what's not. But nonetheless, it's very interesting, and there was so much stuff, from rotary wing UAS, drones, rocket launchers, shoulder-mounted missiles that look suspiciously like javelins, and a robot dog that I almost fell over while I was walking around the show. They've got capabilities in every domain, and they are clearly, they're here to stay, they're here to sell, and there is interest in their equipment. I don't know what you thought when you were having a kind of a wander around their pavilions. Yeah.
Especially the Chinese area of the show was very impressive. The sheer volume of kit they brought was mind-boggling, And then, as you said previously, you don't really know whether some of the systems are real or just mock-ups. Black, white boxes with a nice piece of paper put next to them, I don't think it's going to come as a surprise to anyone. They weren't particularly hospitable. When I went to their stand, they weren't particularly keen in talking to me. Once they learned that I was a journalist, the sort of enthusiasm has fallen even further. But it was very, very interesting to see. And, I don't know, as you said, the UAE tries to stay neutral. Right, doesn't really take part in the, doesn't really have a stance and in the war in Ukraine. But you didn't see that much of a buzz in neither of those pavilions, the Chinese or the Russian, because I don't know, it just didn't seem like they were very actively doing business with anyone. And I'm sure that's not the case. I'm sure they are very much doing business with many other countries in the region, but they just didn't seem to display that very much. I don't know what experience you had when you showed up in their stands.
Well, I didn't really speak to anyone. I took a lot of pictures and tried to grab as many product sheets as I could, to be honest. But I just thought it was interesting. The most interesting thing to me was that the fact that I suppose it's becoming. China is kind of becoming, or I suppose has been for a while, the kind of de facto alternative, right? If you can't afford Western systems, because the West tends to make everything very exquisite and very expensive, and for good reason, because it, in NATO militaries, protecting the life of the personnel is number one. And obviously capability, probably joint number one as well. So joint number one, capability and protecting the person. That means that the stuff is expensive and not everyone can afford that. So, especially now, given the security situation, if you're a country with a limited defence budget, who do you turn to buy your systems from? And there's only really one place you can go, which is China, or, as this dynamic of the UAE and the Gulf countries' defence industries enlarging, that will become an interesting alternative down the line, depending on how the cost scales of Gulf-produced systems or GCC-produced systems. That will be an interesting one to watch. But, the Chinese have got capabilities in every single area, and that's evident by the fact that it's being sold across the world. And I think one of the big things is that it's affordable, and I think that's an interesting challenge that is maybe getting above our heads and into the realms of politics. Is that so defence ultimately and defence industries ultimately are kind of an arm of foreign policy, and so I think the West is going to have to kind of have a discussion with itself about how it approaches arms sales to other countries if it wants to kind of maintain influence to an extent. But that means that maybe you're going to have to look into kind of preferential deals and cost scales and things like that. So I don't know if I've gone on a weird tangent about foreign policy and defence, but I think there's something to think about there. I don't think I've articulated it very well, but there's something in that.
Yeah, I mean, that's a very interesting one, but I think it's not only China. I think there are several other countries that could sort of edge themselves in and find that gap in between, buying very expensive, very capable US or European kit and go to the, other side of the spectrum, buying from China or Russia, for example. I think Turkey is clearly doing a very good job in trying to replicate capabilities, the top capabilities in a more affordable prices. And as I said, South Korea is trying to do that as well. South Korea, Seoul is on a mission as well to sort of diversify their defense portfolio to sort of homegrown, very capable air defense systems and various other kit as well. So, interesting. China is clearly a very successful, country. It's really growing. It's developing new capabilities. By the end of this year, if they carry on producing the amount of aircraft they did in the past 5 years, they will exceed the number of fifth generation aircraft that the US has. So yeah, clearly China is developing, it's growing its defense capabilities very quickly. But I think the US, I would imagine the US will be on a mission and would try to sort of, persuade countries to look elsewhere. I think you could see it last week in Aero India as well, that the US has showed up with the F-16s, with the F-35s, F-18s, and various other aircraft to try to sort of sway India to look further away from China.
Great, and with that, I suppose it's time to end it for the day. Thank you all for listening. This has been another magnificent episode of the Shephard Defence Podcast, brought to you by Shephard Studio and our venerable producer Jack, who has been keeping a close eye on us while we've been sat on the sofas in our hotel. We'd like to thank everyone for tuning in, and hopefully next time we'll have an equally interesting discussion with as many tangents that are hopefully useful. Norbert, do you want to say your goodbyes as well?
Yeah, thanks very much, Harry. Thanks, Jack. Have a safe trip home.